Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thursday, 11:30, LANE County Wellness Corner coming your way. My name is Jed A. I'm the host of LANE County Wellness Corner, and I am so glad you're here. We did get LinkedIn. I'm excited. I met the qualifications finally after about 4 months, and I see myself on the LinkedIn platform. Awesome. Uh, there was one little glitch about chat box. So we'll see what happens. It said read only, so I wasn't really sure. But we've got a great guest today, and many of you know Ron, and we'll be bringing him in just a minute. Uh, this podcast is brought to you by LANE County Wellness Consortium, and it has been formed exclusively. The consortium has been formed exclusively to bring dedicated professionals from all fields of wellness together with a common goal to increase and perpetuate the opportunities to directly and indirectly serve LANE County, Oregon's community with qualified, innovative professionals dedicated to promoting healthy, centered mental and physical lifestyle for an ever-changing landscape of the human wellness field. And we do part of that weekly with our 1 hour LANE County Wellness Corner, a podcast where we interview and chat with local LANE County wellness professionals. This 1 hour weekly show has several goals in mind: to introduce you to local practitioners, therapists, and organizations, learn about their specialty and their services, what types of clients they work with and serve, and most importantly, how long it takes to get an appointment. This is a critical aspect of the consortium. The demands on services have never been so high, and in many cases, a client can't get the help they need when they need it. So tune in, learn what you may not know about the wellness field in LANE County, and get the latest updates on finding the right professional or organization to meet your needs. I'm so glad I get to introduce this guy. I tell you, from the reading that I've done on Ron, is he's a trailblazer, and I'm excited for this conversation. Ron Unger is a therapist here in Eugene who specializes in helping people with the experiences like hearing voices, paranoia, delusional beliefs. This includes people who have been diagnosed with psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. But he's also very passionate about teaching others on how to do this kind of work. And he has reached thousands of students through his courses and seminars on the therapy for psychosis and the intersection of trauma and psychosis, and on addressing spiritual and cultural issues within treatment for psychosis. He's also a co-facilitator of a local group on hearing voices. And I want to welcome Ron. Let's bring him in. There you are, Mr. Unger.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
for the introduction.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. This is this is this is this is awesome. I've been waiting for this interview for a while. We have a lot of awesome guests, and lately this particular subject matter, I've been doing a little bit of reading on you and what you do, and I'm utterly amazed because in my early years, in my practice, I had uh, several dual diagnoses. I ran a halfway house, and a couple of my clients had alcohol and drug substance abuse, as well as being diagnosed with schizophrenia. So it was an interesting journey for me. So, Ron, let's start out a little bit with an easy question. Why is it once believed that many people thought that talk therapy could not be helpful, and what is it evidence that now indicates that this is effectively helping?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I went to school in social work, which was around, I graduated in 2000, what I learned is that therapy for psychosis just didn't work, and that it was because psychosis was a result of biological problems, and and they claimed they had research that showed that. But it turned out that there was like one particular big study where they used inexperienced therapists, and they didn't have any good results. But there were smaller studies even then that suggested, oh yeah, if you do it right, it can work. And since then, especially with cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis or
CBT, right?
psychosis, there's it was a number of years ago where they were saying over 50 studies showing good results, and some really strongly. Like there's this one study it was called the Feeling Safe study for people with paranoid delusions. And half of the people made really major improvements to the point where their delusions became pretty insignificant. Now, another quarter improved a bit, and then another quarter, they really didn't manage to help at all. Of course, the sad thing is we don't know how to help everybody. Nobody's completely successful, but there is evidence now that, hey, people at least have a fighting chance to get better if they get the right kind of help.
But hasn't that also been the case with most mental health? As time has gone on over the course of the last 25 to 30 years, we have found what works and what doesn't work. And so this is just a time iteration of the experiences, what works, and then throwing away what doesn't work, right?
Yeah, it's true. Even with simpler, we think of it as simpler disorders. If you look at the studies, they never managed to help everybody. It doesn't mean people are being unhelpful. It just means you got to keep figuring out what fits for different people and keep experimenting, and hopefully.
Hey, Ron, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Maybe speak a little closer to your screen.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry
there you go.
All right.
So let me ask you this. What is the relationship between difficult or trauma life experiences and psychosis? Why is this important to understand the differences between those two categories?
Well, I think it's important because for quite a while, people were, like I said, framing psychosis, it's just something that biologically goes wrong. But what we found now in the research is that if people have really difficult life experiences, especially a lot of trauma, it really increases their chances of having psychosis. Like some studies that looked at multiple types of trauma, people that grew up with multiple types of trauma.
Right.
It was actually as strong a connection between that and psychosis as there is between smoking and lung cancer, or pretty much in that range. So, and this comes really just as far as, helping people understand, hey, it's not just that you're confused. Maybe your life was distressing and confusing, and maybe in your response to that, you've gotten a little mixed up, but we can maybe help you sort that out. And then helping people address the trauma can also really help people recover. It's not to say that everybody with psychosis has had a lot of trauma, but that is an important link for a lot of people.
Those are linked together, though, correct? Is that what I hear you saying? In some of the population? In therapy, your practice, you use CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, for psychosis. Is there any other approach, or is this the most valuable approach that you found?
Oh, it's the most researched, but really, I think CBT for psychosis has always been happy to borrow from other approaches, and sometimes I'm not even sure, like where I'm coming from for that. So, and there's also like an approach called the open dialogue approach that was developed in northern Finland, where they just emphasized on just trying to create dialogue with people and their families and stuff like that had a lot of success with that approach. So, and I've learned these different approaches, and so but I think cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis is sort of the foundational thing that I work off of.
And so you're also using this in your training as well. That's a form of that you're passing on to the other therapists that come to learn under you.
Yeah, that's I'd say the majority of the training I've done has had that has been drawn from CBT for psychosis.
Many people have been told over the many years, and I suspect that it's ever changing as a result of previous conversation that we had, that schizophrenia or schizophrenics, phrenative or disorders are always a lifelong condition, but we don't believe that anymore, do we?
Yeah, well, it's still out there a lot. That's often what a lot of people are told. They're um, but the thing is, there's a couple of reasons not to believe it. One is just the research that's done on groups of people. Like, I mean, you can look at Courtney Harding's work, which actually isn't even new anymore, but she actually worked with people who had been on the back wards of some of the mental hospitals. So you'd think some of
Mm-hmm.
the most, but then they found, when they given some rehabilitative work, that a lot of these people ended up, and they followed them up over decades, and a lot of these people kind of got better. They got jobs and relationships, and they were moving on with their lives and not taking, many of them not taking medication anymore. So you can't say that was a solution. But also, if you just look at individual stories, I'm part of the
Right.
recovery movement, and so you just see lots of people that were diagnosed with schizophrenia at some point, and then they recovered. Now, an interesting story about that. There's a psychiatrist, Daniel Fisher, and he when he was younger, was diagnosed with schizophrenia and treated for it
Oh,
over a
interesting.
period of years. And a friend of his was in a class once, and the professor was going on about how schizophrenia is a lifelong condition, and all that. And this guy raised his hand and said, "Well, my friend Dan Fisher, he recovered, and now he's a psychiatrist." Oh, impossible! He didn't have schizophrenia. So the friend went and told Dan this, and Dan said,
Ah,
"Oh, you should show him my medical record." And so they brought in
interesting.
the big medical record. The guy
Right.
flips through it. Finally, he looks up and he says, "He must be a lousy psychiatrist." Because the professor was thinking, well, he
Sure.
must still have schizophrenia, and so he'd make a
Sure.
terrible psychiatrist. But in fact, Dan Fisher has been taught around the world, is well recognized, has been on a presidential commission. He's someone who functions at a high level. And so the fact is, you can fully meet the criteria for schizophrenia and then later
Sure.
get better and get your life back. It's possible. Now, I can't say, unfortunately, it's not what usually happens. People
Right.
usually struggle.
Sure.
But if they got the right kind of help more often, I think you could see more stories of people that do get better.
Well, it's interesting. You had given me several websites, and the one that's up there right now, yeah, I have this on my other screen. I don't want to look away from the camera. On my other screen, I have this website that's coming across on the ticker, and I would highly recommend those of you that are listening to check out that website. It is recovery from schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders is the header, and it's the first post in here, a conversation about madness, the mysticism and the reenchantment uh, of psychology. And there's a great example of what you just shared about this psychiatrist. You know, time as I have experienced in my limited knowledge and limited practice, that there have been many, many different ways to recover from mental illnesses. And it's just fascinating today to see that we're bridging several gaps. And this is a great example of what you just shared.
Hmm.
What, uh, what influences do your own experience of mental health challenges and those that you've seen in your family or uh, in your practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's often for a lot of us practicing in the field, our own experiences have an influence,
Yeah.
um, and for me, it was, I mean, unfortunately, I grew up with a fair amount of trauma and distressing experience, but then I had, as a young adult, um, sort of like was trying to reject all the ways that I learned to look at myself. And I went into some pretty, part of it, I mean, some use of psychedelic drugs that got some of it started, but really started getting into some kind of out there mental places that could have easily been diagnosed as psychosis, or I even kind of understood it that way, but I was already reading radical stuff about psychosis and how it could be a meaningful journey and this kind of stuff. R.D. Laing, if some people
Sure.
know that name.
Sure. Yeah.
And I actually kind of like, fortunately, was lucky enough to get the right kind of support just from people around me, friends and stuff, and meet social groups that were helpful, and
Right.
kind of got more interested in making good connections with people, and got a little less wild in my mental states and worked through it. But then I had siblings, other people in my family, who kind of went out there somewhat in similar ways, but got a little more lost and ended up getting
Right.
pulled into the psychiatric system. So
Right.
one question was what was going on with them totally different than what was with me? Because with me, it was just kind of like, it was kind of like a journey or questioning that ultimately, was worked out. But for them, it was all being defined as, oh, you're just ill and have a disease. And it's like, well, is that really true? I mean, I really question
Sure.
that.
How
And
far separated in age or time spent with these family members? Was there a large? Were these children your brothers and sisters, or mother, father, uncles?
yeah, well,
How
actually,
far?
siblings.
Okay, so how
Yeah.
far apart were you in age?
Um, not there was, more like 6 years or
Okay.
more, but
Well, I
you
noticed
know,
the reason I ask is because it's interesting. I have two brothers, one deceased now, and the youngest one, and it's interesting how their experience in the family unit was quite different than mine. I was the oldest, uh, regardless of what position we were in, but we had different experiences in that family unit, and it was quite amazing to see um, how the youngest one did not fare as well. Um, Not sure why, but there was a, a greater experience of problems. So it's interesting. That's why I asked.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you for sharing that. Yeah,
So anyway, that got me interested in, hey, we should be doing something different. And then, I talked to professionals, and they well, we don't know how to do anything different. So I thought, well, I got to figure that out, figure out
I've,
what people are doing elsewhere, and how I can, maybe start doing something different, and maybe teaching other people how to do something different.
sure. Well, the one that just struck me um, is normalizing the term hearing voices. That when I read your first pieces of material before we confirmed that you were going to be a guest on the show, I was astonished at how that has always been the worst stigma for that population for so many years. And now to hear that hearing voices is okay. It's all part of the pathway. It's all part of the process. And normalizing those terms, especially in your writings, it's just fascinating to me. Has it always been a part of the illness, or is there something that would be gone if a person was if they were healthy? Did they stop hearing voices, or like the psychiatrist? It's is this phenomena? Uh, yeah, I'll just stop. What? Tell us a little bit about hearing voices.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, I think for quite a while, hearing voices has been conceptualized within psychiatry as something that's just part of an illness. It could be part of different disorders, but it was always considered as part of a disorder. But
Sure.
then really they did population-based research and found out that there are actually quite a few people out there that report hearing voices fairly often, but have not had distress as a result. They've gone on with their lives fine. It doesn't seem to be part of any disorder. And it's also true there's a lot of cultural variations. Like I know a Native American psychiatrist, but he has said that growing up, it was just, common. You hear the voices of your ancestors, and sometimes they could be pesky, like he has a grandmother who would pester him, a deceased grandmother whose voice he heard, and it would pester her. But it wasn't until he went to medical school that he learned that most people didn't have this experience. And further, they tried to teach him that it was bad that he had the experience. And he was like, whoa.
Because that's a cultural and a spiritual perspective for that population, correct? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Or I know another guy who went on a journey down the Amazon, and there were some indigenous people that were, like making or having the boat work or whatever. And at camping at night, they asked them, like, when you hear the wind through the trees, do you hear the voice of your ancestors? And they thought it was really sad when he answered no. They just thought it was so sad.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I lived over in Eastern Oregon on the Umatilla reservation for a while as a young guy. And I got to tell you, I really gained a real appreciation for Native population and the ritual, the spiritual, and, from the stories they shared with me, that is a part of their ancestral backgrounds. So what are you want to explain a little bit about the groups that you're running, the Hearing Voices groups, and what's important to know about these groups? And and I'll put up all the stuff on your contacts. I'm at the ticker, everybody. There's a ticker with Ron's material, his phone numbers, websites, and so you can contact him if you want more information.
Yeah, so the Hearing Voices groups, the perspective they have is that hearing voices in itself should not be considered as a psychiatric issue. But people can have lots of terrible problems with voices if they don't know how to relate to them or for various reasons. And so, some people obviously are very distressed and need help. But the idea shouldn't be necessarily focusing on getting rid of the voices, but rather changing that relationship with them.
Interesting.
And the premise of Hearing Voices groups, they actually started when this one particular patient, and I think it was in the Netherlands, was taking all the medication her psychiatrist recommended, but it wasn't, it wasn't stopping the problems with the voices, and he just tried to get her to ignore it. And she said, well, these voices are real. You believe in a God that you can't even see or hear. And I'm hearing these voices all the time. They're real. Why don't you figure out what people do about this? So he actually got on TV and explained this dilemma and asked people to write in. And a whole bunch of people did. And then they thought, well, let's get some people together and share ideas. And that was the birth of what's called the Hearing Voices movement. And so now people meet in groups all over the world. And the
this is an international group. This is an international program.
We have one in Eugene that meets twice a month, and it's completely free, by the way. You don't need to identify as, you can be somebody that lives well with your voices or has a lot of trouble with them. Either one, you're welcome. But the idea in voices groups is to just share experiences. For one thing, a lot of voice hearers find that if they just start talking about hearing voices, people around them freak out. and so it makes it hard for people to talk about their experience. So the Hearing Voices group, you can talk about it. If you're having troubles, you can talk about your troubles and talk about, ask other people what they've tried. And we try not to tell anybody what to think about the voices,
Right.
People
Right.
might have various opinions about what the voices are, about what causes them, about what to do about them. And, it's hearing voices groups are, you can share various ideas. Oh, my idea is this. but we
Sure.
really discourage telling other people what the right way of doing it is. And that keeps the discussions kind of, open and supportive, and people can take what you want and leave what you don't, kind of thing.
Is that at the Healing Project, Trauma Project
Trauma
offices?
Healing
Trauma,
Project,
yeah,
right?
Trauma Healing.
In Eugene is where they're
Yeah,
located. The first and third Thursday at 1 p.m.
yeah.
And,
Elaine's going to be a guest on the show.
oh,
So
great.
yeah, on the 23rd. Can you see the chat in the screen there? Max just asks a question. Are you familiar with cases of drug-induced psychosis, specifically hearing voices caused by sudden withdrawal from the opioid?
I'm not familiar with it being caused by that specifically, but anything
Okay,
that really yanks people around can be a trigger for psychosis. I mean, giving birth to a baby can trigger psychosis. It's just something new and disturbing, and so something that physiologically, like withdrawing from a drug, could certainly shake up people's reality. And again, it won't be everybody, but some people might fall into that state of mind and need help.
sure. Well, okay. So we got down the groups, and we meeting. You're meeting twice a month, you said.
Yeah.
Ah,
It's not always me facilitating. We have another couple people who facilitate. So,
awesome.
but it's a good group. Encourage more
Um,
people to come.
from your perspective, to help uh, people who don't necessarily agree with any kind of mental problem, even when it seems to us that it's a severe problem. How do you deal with that recognition that in many cases is important to, from my perspective, successful uh, healing?
Mhm. What the basic idea, and as we think about it, let's say in CBT for psychosis, is that
Okay,
we want to join the person and working towards making their life better. So if the person says, "Oh, I don't have any kind of mental problem," I might say, "Yeah, well, what's going on in your life? What would you like to be better?" And it might be like, "Well, I like to be getting along better with my family, but they all tell me I'm crazy." And then it might be like, "Oh, maybe we can work on understanding that together. You know, what your family's perspective is, how you might get along with them better." And so we're not asking the person to agree that they're mentally ill. We're instead
right.
saying, let's understand this relationship problem better and how to make it work better. And obviously any issues of how the person is functioning mentally will come out as you look into that relationship. So you start with the person's own goals and then only deal with the other stuff as you need to.
What are some of the ways that that can backfire when people are sharply confronted about beliefs? We think that they're delusional, and what approach can you to work with to make that better?
Yeah. It's interesting. They used to say that, like, well, don't talk to people about their delusions. That will just make it worse. And one reason is because they often talk to people about it in a really confrontive way. Well, that's a delusion, that you're talking to
Right,
aliens in your mind,
right,
don't you
right,
know? And the thing is, it's actually not just people with delusions, but it's humans in general. They found that if people have a strongly held belief and you just sharply confront it, um, they don't react very well. They've even done brain studies on this, which I think are interesting. So they identify somebody's strongly held belief, and then they bring up, they sharply confront it while studying the brain. And do you think
right,
reason and
right.
logic lights up in the brain as the person tries to deal with the evidence you came out? No. Reason and logic shuts down while fight or flight gets stimulated. In other words, the person just digs in to defend their belief no matter what when they're sharply confronted. And so that's true for people with psychosis as well. So what works much better is trying first to show understanding. Let me understand what you're thinking. Let me understand how you got there. And then being curious around the edges. Well, does everybody think that way? Do you understand why maybe somebody else thinks differently? Why do you think that is? And or and just looking at, and as you explore around the edges, that's where there's actually room for some change. And sometimes people, get more interested themselves in questioning their beliefs, or sometimes it's more like helping the person get on with things, even though they have a certain belief.
Yeah.
Because, look, actually, if you look at the general population, a lot of people have beliefs that psychiatrists would say are delusional, like they believe in telepathy. They have spirit guides that talk to them. There's all sorts of beliefs that people get on with their lives while having.
Right.
And
not sure where those come from, but unfortunately, they do exist.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you believe are maybe some of the common mistaken beliefs that people have about the role of anti-psychotic drugs in treating psychosis?
Yeah, that's a huge subject. I think the common understanding out there is like, well, somebody with psychotic disorder, and people are often even told this, there's something wrong with your brain. You just need to take this drug. You need to take it for life. If you don't take it, you'll just go back to being psychotic. And then there often are really obvious cases where people say, oh, I don't like this drug, and throw it in the trash. And pretty soon they are lost in psychosis again. And like, oh, this is so terrible. And so it's important to recognize that can happen. But what a lot of people don't realize is there's also a lot of people that manage in the long run to get off the medications, and many of them do well. And so it's actually we don't understand yet all of the variations, or why some people, manage to get off and some people don't. We do know one thing is, that if you experiment with going off more slowly, you're more likely to succeed because the withdrawal reactions don't shake you up as much. Plus, it's just less dangerous because, if you've gone down 10% on your medication and you start having a bit of a bumpy ride, that's not nearly as dangerous as going off all the way and having a really bumpy ride.
Right.
And you can always decide, oh, it didn't work that well. I went back up on medication.
And then you could titrate it. Then you could titrate it even less. Then maybe the next time you would titrate it over the course of 3 months instead of 1 month.
Yeah. And also as people learn more skills to deal with stuff that comes up, then they can navigate those bumps better and it's not get thrown as much. Now, the other thing is like, it's not really, we don't really know what the long-term effect of taking the medications is. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that in the long term, there can be significant problems. Yeah. So it's actually not irrational when people talk about wanting to get off the drugs. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean it's always a good idea for them to do it right then or whatever. Yeah. But it's just to be aware that, hey, there's two sides to this. And what we really need is people to be thoughtful and so encourage, discuss, why don't you talk about that with your prescriber? Or, hey, let's have a thoughtful approach to this. And let's, maybe, make changes, consider making changes carefully and recognize it's the person's own risk taking. So if people, decide to try to make do with less drugs, they are taking a risk. They're taking a risk that they might get destabilized or end up back in the hospital. But if they stay on the drugs, that's another kind of risk. They're risking possibly staying on a drug that they don't need, that has some negative effects for
There
for a
are
long time when
some,
maybe they don't need it.
and there are
So,
some side effects to that, correct? Most of those drugs do have some adverse side effects.
mhm,
Yeah,
yeah. So we can't really, whichever way they go is going to be a bit of a gamble, or maybe
sure,
even a big gamble. But we don't really have, the right to tell people which gamble they should take. I think.
sure.
I mean,
Right.
I do encourage people to, hey, be thoughtful, be careful. Let's try to stay out of trouble and have your life work, and and make thoughtful approach to it. There's something called collaborative decision making, where you really kind of like work on, being collaborative with the person and figuring out what they really
Right.
want and what
Yeah.
is reasonable to work.
Well, it's interesting because the last couple questions are you have to have a truly deep respect and compassion for what you do, and the role of compassion is critical, in my opinion, to developing healthy relationships as well as uh, in that recovery process. Can you talk a little bit about compassion and self compassion in the recovery of psychosis?
Yeah, like earlier we were talking about what kind of approach to psychosis I use, and I mentioned CBT for psychosis is
Right,
the main
right,
one, but it actually integrates really well with another approach to therapy that's called the compassion focused therapy, which is developed by Paul Gilbert and colleagues, and which really emphasizes the central role of compassion and self compassion, and people. Because people with psychosis, like things that push people into psychosis, are often things like stress and social alienation. And under those kind of conditions, there isn't a lot of compassion to be found.
right, right,
So, so, and then people become psychotic. They often also behave in ways that scare and alienate people. So people aren't giving them a lot of compassion either. But if we can, first as treatment providers, show some compassion, then maybe help the person have some compassion towards themselves, because people are often very upset with themselves for everything that went on with their own psychosis, right?
hmm
But if people can be compassionate with themselves, and then the trickier part is even be compassionate with the disturbing forces within themselves, like maybe the voices that have been causing them so much trouble.
right,
That, like, let's say the person has a voice that's just been urging them to kill themselves, right? And so in traditional psychiatry, you might think, oh, that's a voice; it's a sign of illness. We need to suppress it. Look how dangerous it is. But from a compassion-focused therapy point of view, now, of course, the first thing is we want the person to be able to resist the voice, right? And
sure,
not kill
of course,
themselves while
of
they hear
course,
it. And be compassionate, towards themselves. Like, hey, maybe there's the part of themselves that's just hearing the voice, and that part is maybe really distressed by hearing that message. But if they can be kind to themselves, hey, I'm hearing that voice again. That's really difficult. This is a difficult time. I can be kind to myself as I undergo this difficult thing, and just get into that mode.
right,
That can really help people, not get so shaken up by the voice. But then they can also turn towards the voice itself with a kind of kindness and curiosity. So it might be, well, I hear you telling me to kill myself. I'm definitely not wanting to do that. But I'm
right.
curious what upset you that made you want to say
Made you
that.
want
And
to, yeah.
you
Why
know,
did you say
and
that? Right,
because maybe it's coming from a part of them that's very unhappy with part of what's going on in life. And by turning towards, instead of just fighting that voice, God, it's instead more a kindness, like, oh, where are you, coming from? What's distressed you?
right,
Um, there's actually a a short video on this approach. If people Google compassion for voices,
interesting. Okay.
this 5-minute
Compassion for
video,
voices.
5-minute video will come up, and it just really gives a good summary of that approach.
I'll put that up in the ticker. Looks like we have another question in the chat box. I have used your suggestion of respecting the voice when working with drug-induced psychosis. The result helped clients recognize multiple suppressed severe trauma. This is letting you know that she's used some of your technique. Max is he says she appreciates you. That's great.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, there's some famous stories out there. Like one of the most well-known voice hearers, because of her TED talk that has had millions of views, is Eleanor Longden. And when she first started hearing voices, which she went to the psychiatry and they told her, this is a sign you have schizophrenia. We must get rid of these voices. And she tried to get rid of them, but they just multiplied and got really nasty. And then she was just in a battle with them for years. But it was once she started to take a different, first she had really psychotic interpretations of what they were, like believing they belonged to beings that could come hurt her if she didn't do what they said and stuff like that.
Right.
But when she realized they weren't that they were just in her own mind. And then it was when she got curious about are they just, are they just my enemy, or do they come from something else? And then she started connecting it to the traumas that had happened. And she started realizing, hey, these voices are coming from the part of me that actually directly experienced some really horrible things.
The trauma.
And so then she started being more kind to them, and then they started having a cooperative relationship. And now Eleanor Longden is a researcher in the field, and she works on something called dialogue with voices, where
I pulled it up.
I'll
go watch that after we're done. Thank you very much for that. You can see that. Her Eleanor Longden, Longden at TED Talk, and it'll pop up. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I have one last question, and this is probably, my guess is, because this is such a passionate part of you, is your efforts to educate others. What does this look like for you? Is this something that is a full-time passion? Is it part of your practice? Are you spending a lot of your time in the educational aspect of teaching others?
Well, I've actually wouldn't mind having more opportunities to do education, but like right now, I'm doing a series of seminars for Cascadia Behavioral Health up in Portland, and I do.
I saw that
preparing for a conference in Toronto and stuff like that. But then I also have on-demand, self-paced courses that people can take.
Interesting.
If you go to my blog, there's information about that.
Okay, so that's the one, recovery from psychosis.org, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can find information there.
And then Mad in America, that was one you sent me yesterday afternoon after we talked. That's looks like another blog.
I've done some cross posting, and I work with Mad in America to produce webinars, like where we'll get together with sometimes it's researchers, sometimes it's people with lived experience of psychosis that have a lot of insights, and have them do presentations. The next one we're going to do is in June, and it's going to be some people that did a trial of how to do better therapy with people that have had trauma and psychosis.
Interesting. Oh, wow.
And had some really successful outcomes. So it'll be interesting to hear from them.
And that's on the blog that's running across the ticker right now at the bottom of the page, recoverfrompsychosis.org. You can get all that information on the whereabouts, what's Ron's doing.
And I don't know if we ever got my YouTube channel on there, but I mean, you can access that. You can access that just by, if you look Ron Unger YouTube, it'll come up.
Yeah.
But I have there a lot of these. It links to a lot of these webinars that I've done in the past, so you can just watch them for free on various different topics. And that's certainly a thing I do to get education out there.
Ron, I can't begin to thank you. This has really, really been amazing. And I was told ahead of time from some of my colleagues that this would be a great show. So I'm glad you took the time to be here and share with our audience. We're still in a growing phase. I couldn't quite figure out why LinkedIn wasn't. It was working. It's being shown. We're being seen. I just can't get the chat box to function. So if there's somebody on LinkedIn and you had a question, you can send it to me in my post, and I can move it on to Ron, and he can reply back, or I can reply back, because we're both connected on LinkedIn. And I apologize for that technical issue. Don't know why. It just said read only. So I wasn't able to interact with anybody, but this has been amazing, Ron, and I thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me onto the show. It's
would you? Are there any last parting words that you have that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, if people want to follow, my work and hear about things that are coming up, or classes or webinars, I encourage you to go to the blog, and you'll see there's a place to sign up.
That's right here coming across the screen.
So I just really hope more people become aware that these experiences that often they can throw us and really be confusing. Oh my gosh, what's going on?
Right.
And that's usually when we first encounter somebody, we are just kind of like, but I think you have to sit with the for a bit and see that often what's really going on is, people are struggling with human stuff, and it's gotten a little bizarre, but as you look into it, it starts becoming more understandable.
Yeah.
Eleanor Longden would say that the symptoms often both disguise and reveal what the person is actually struggling with. And it's because the person is ambivalent, they don't necessarily want to deal with it. They're kind of like disguising it to themselves. It's like Eleanor Longden's had all this trauma in her, but it came out in the form of these weird voices, which was in some sense were disguising what the issue was, because the real issue was trauma, but it was coming out with these weird voices.
Right.
But they also reveal it because they also, in some sense, the voices represented the trauma.
Well, and that passion that you spoke about, that right there was a sounds to me anyway, listening to you explain it, an extremely positive way of interacting with yourself, the voice, and any of the clinicians that, or for that matter, non-clinician, the family members that are afraid of who you are, what you're experiencing, and that's an amazing step, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could talk a lot just about families, because there's so many issues that come up for them. There is, if on my website, there's a way to search the website, and if you search for family, I have a whole page of resources for family and friends to learn more about approaches that might help. So
and that's coming across the screen right now. recoveryfrompsychosis.org. That's Ron's blog. Well, Ron, thank you so much. I really appreciate it very much.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. Have a great afternoon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, man, I'll tell you what, that was awesome. I just based on when it was suggested that I try to get Ron onto the show, from my colleagues, I started reading some of his material, and I was just amazed. And I think the biggest thing for me was he had written a piece, and it might be right. No, no, it's not on that. That's on a different post. Nor he used the terminology normalizing hearing voices, and to me, that made a huge amount of sense to me. Um, I I don't know about you, but I talk to myself all the time. So having a healthy uh, relationship with uh, a psychosis diagnosis, having a compassionate relationship with yourself, sounds like from Ron's expertise, sounds like a good path. And I've just, if you have any questions for him, you've got all the information. You can link up with him on LinkedIn. Here's his phone number and email address for Ron Unger at gmail.com, or his office number 541-513-1811. And then, of course, been bouncing back and forth. And here's his blog. And like he said, just Google his name on YouTube and a bunch of stuff will pop up. I want to thank each and every one of you for uh, staying with us and the issues that we had with LinkedIn. I am excited that now we have a connection to LinkedIn. We qualified. So now my test for next week is to figure out the chat box, and we'll figure that out. And I want to thank you so much. Next week, our guest is Mark Mark McMahon. Mark McMahon is a local um, author. His specialty is substance abuse disorder, and he has been writing about these experiences for many, many, many years. And I can't wait to share his story with you. So I look forward to seeing you. Tune in next. Ooh, that was weird. The green screen must be not working anyway. Anyway, we'll see you next week at 11:30 on Thursday.